Okay, this is my part 2 video of Stephen King's The Stand. In my first video, I gave a general overview of the book, why I liked it, things that bothered me, my overall rating, which is 5 out of 5 stars. And that video is for anyone who hadn't read the book yet, as it contains no spoilers. This video is my spoilers video, which I am even more excited to make because I get to talk about all the juicy stuff containing spoilers. So if you haven't read this book, do not watch this. And so I also wrote a book review wrote this all out and put it on my Medium page. If you want to read it, I will link it below. So I've read other post-apocalyptic books that start, after it, and then there isn't a lot of explanation about what actually happened. Well, he gets into everything. He gets into, how the whole thing went down. So, and how it affected all the characters. That is the whole first part of this book, right? So I liked that. I feel like that's necessary to truly understand the whole situation. But really, more importantly, to understand understand the characters too, is to understand where they were at before the virus, and to see how they reacted to it and how they came to be the kind of people they are and after the virus, right? So King really delivered here for me. So Project Blue, top secret programs, government cover-ups, all that stuff was super exciting to me. The constantly shifting antigen virus seemed realistic enough for me to believe, and actually almost realistic that I was like, oh, could that really happen? Because that would really suck. At least with our coronavirus, well, I don't really want to compare it, but it doesn't seem that, well, I guess we don't really know enough about it yet, so I won't even say. I don't want to make a lot of comparisons to coronavirus because I don't want to be triggered, so I was going to keep to the story. But I liked how he explained how the body can't produce enough antibodies because the virus will shift again. Talks about the transmission rate, 99.4% communicability, and that kind of gave a prelude to what was going to be ahead. How many people are actually going to die. So you kind of, I liked how I was going into it, thinking, okay, it's going to be bad. Lots of people are going to die. I thought it was fun learning about, King's interpretation of how the government will go, martial law. He called thugs in army uniforms, barricading towns, controlling the media, shooting innocent civilians for free speech. So some of it was a little bit over the top. Obviously, I think some of it, being in the military myself, I don't think that people would be just like massively shooting innocent civilians. I don't think it would get that out of control. We just don't do that kind of thing. So I'm speaking from my perspective and my experience that I've been through serving in the military. So, he also had soldiers going AWOL. I think, people go AWOL even now, so you just don't know. Soldiers shooting each other on purpose out of fear and panic. I don't really think that would happen. I want to move on to the population response. This was fun. The mass exodus of people, thousands fleeing, rioting, looting was really described a lot, and it really gave a clear picture of the situation for me. And it was interesting for me to think about whether people would, with this kind of virus, flee the cities or stay at home, and lock themselves in, and kind of what I would do, in 2020, obviously we quarantine and stay at home. But in this book, a lot of people were fleeing, trying to get out of New York City at least. And I guess I don't really know why they were doing that, actually. I would kind of wonder why didn't more of them stay at home and quarantine. But maybe it was, there was just such a panic. And also maybe because there was the media wasn't saying what was going on as much. And whereas in 2020, everything's all over the internet. So that's another interesting part about that I thought was interesting, is that how people would react without the internet, without back in the 70s when Stephen King wrote this, we didn't have smartphones. There was still payphones, and I don't think there was well, I know there wasn't access to the internet back then. So people were just confused. And I think if they were more confused, they'd probably panic more and then maybe flee their cities. So, okay. So part 1 for me was disturbing. I talked about this in my last video. Children dying, the melancholy. There was one point where I was like, this is a bit much, but I'm just gonna put my hope in Stephen King here, that he's just not gonna leave the whole world and, you know, a disappointed hellhole with a terrible ending to this book. Like, I just kind of put my hope in it that there's gonna be some positivity, some good that comes out of this situation. So I'm glad I stuck with it, because there definitely was. And I felt like my heart was a little bit yanked out of my chest at some points, and I was going to be really, really mad if Stephen King didn't kind of fix some of what he broke in the beginning. But, you know, as I said in my last video, I was pleasantly surprised by the positive hope and joyful feelings that I got at the end of this book. So I want to talk about part 2 a little bit. I enjoyed most the imaginative discussion on the fourth dimensional free will in chapter 46. So Glenn, the sociology professor, he brought some really interesting things. And I liked the talk about how airplanes that crash have less passengers, according to some study he referenced. And that indicates, according to him, that people may have a psychic awareness and intuition about future disaster and the ability to avoid it. So that was really, really cool and kind of sci-fi-ish. Or would you call it fantasy? I'm not sure. I got lost in Harold's dark journey of discovering himself and embracing his own madness. That was cool. I'm actually going to make a part 3 to this video all about all the characters. So I'm not going to get into characters again too much in this video. This book is there's so much to this book. That's why I decided to break it down into 3 videos. So, but just to end with Harold, I did find it fun to put myself in his mind, in the mind of a villain, to understand how such a person would think. What annoys me most about young adult fiction, not to keep ripping on young adult, but like, I've just read some bad young adult fictions recently, and what annoys me most is when the protagonist is just like this wonderful, good person with no flaws, and just like, I want to be in the mind of a villain, of a mad person, of a person who's just lost it completely, because, I mean, it could be because I work in mental health too, so obviously I find anybody that's different than me to be interesting. And that's not to say that I'm like a totally good person or whatever. But in the end, she simply died. It was so undramatic, right? It was so, like, in the end, she simply died. I think for me, I was like, I expected something much more, like a poetic, dramatic ending with Rita. And I had in my mind that she might die, so I was expecting that. I mean, I didn't know if she would, but I thought, you know, if she died, it's definitely going to be a big dramatic thing. But it was not. So that's interesting. Contrast that with one of the lesser known characters, but my number 1 favorite character, being Dana. Okay, so Nadine was my number 2 favorite. Dana was my number 1. But this is just crazy. So Dana, who barely has a role in the book at all, had by far the most dramatic death. She was also the most courageous, awesomeness character, I think. I pictured her as a Ronda Rousey. Strong, clever, fearless woman. Gritty, witty, heroic. Like, she'll stick with me forever. Like, I'll never forget her or her character. She's real to me. The scene of her death, oh my goodness, most suspenseful part of the book for me. So she was pulled into Flagg's office, in case you don't remember, after he discovered she was a spy. But Flagg was being like weirdly calm and amiable, wanting to let her go home in a moped. You know, I'm like, what's happening? What's going on here? He's up to something, right? So she caught on to his deception, like right about the same time that I was like, oh, I see what he's up to. I get what he's doing here. she caught it on the same time, like in the same sentence. I was like, oh yeah, she gets it. But she acted on it. She acted on it like I wouldn't have. I figured it out, but it would have taken me longer, I think, to figure out exactly what I would do. Like, oh shit, he's gonna kill me. Like, he's gonna kill me. What am I gonna do? You know? But that's why I say, like, I think she's so smart and witty, and that's why I loved her character so much, because she thought, like, so fast what to do and reacted. She's like, just, you know, you think she's gonna get out of it, use her wit, get out of the room, do something, you know, karate slash him, or like somehow mind rape him, you know. She's like, it says, King writes, she killed herself by simply whipping her head around to the right. And just like that, she's a martyr. Her eye goes through the sharded glass. This was so shocking for me. And this was a triumphant death. This was the most dramatic book. So the reason I'm talking about this and digress to talk about Dana, and I was talking about Rita, is because why Dana, the character who had the little tiny role in the book, had the most dramatic death, but then Rita, who I felt like was one of the most important characters, she just had this basic death, basically. So why? And that's why I think King is kind of masterful in a sense. Like, why? Why? I thought about this for a long time, and I have an answer. A long time. I didn't write this. I'm not making this review. I finished reading this book like a month ago, and it took me like this long to really think about these things. So I think it's a religious allegory. King calls this novel I think he called it a dark Christian novel. A dark Christian novel, I believe, were his words. But I think this was a religious allegory, right? Because Rita has a seemingly meaningless death, almost, right? The free zone expected Rita to lead as a prophet and counselor, just like Jesus Christ's followers expected him to be their king. And in the end, he ended up riding in a donkey and dying. That was something back then that nobody expected. It was like leaving everyone to wonder, like, what was the point of all this? I don't understand. Why the hell did this happen this way? You know. So I think that was an allegory for that. And with the end point being that it may have appeared meaningless, but maybe there's a sequel and maybe something's going to happen. Like, maybe she's going to come back. She's going to resurrect. But then I don't think there's a sequel to this book. So, and then the last thing, of course, need to be talked about is the annihilation of Las Vegas. Cicero, I believe it is called. The most unanswered part of the stand's conclusion, and the whole reason that I wanted to make this video. And chapter 73, not the total end, but the end in terms of good versus evil, almost, or is it? But the ball of electricity, the flag flicked, grew in the sky, and looked like a hand. Flag yelled, "No!" and vanished. And then, a big finisher. The righteous and unrighteous alike were consumed in the holy fire. Right? Does anyone remember reading that? I do. That's why I wrote it down here. In the Old Testament, God is sometimes referred to as a consuming fire, in the context of God not tolerating the worship of other gods. He is also consuming fire when he destroyed Israel's enemies. The idea here is that of a wildfire that would destroy those who oppose God's people. So that makes sense. And this is being another allegory. This is my meaning of this ending, okay? This is my meaning, that King was maybe using it as a holy consuming fire, because he did use the words consumed in the holy fire. So look up the words consuming fire in Bible, and you will get all these answers. So I mean that seems a pretty obvious allegory to me. But it so could mean so many different things to different people. So I'm curious to know what other people thought of this. And, you know, just driving home my opinion of this allegory, that if God's consuming fire destroyed Israel's enemies, and everyone who worshipped false gods, then his consuming fire obviously swallowed up the entire city because they were going against the good. They were going against his people, would have been the people in Boulder or not Cicero, the Free Zone. Okay, so that kind of led me to another thinking of why were the righteous and unrighteous consumed? Because I take issue with this. Obviously, there were some characters there that had died in that fire as well, or the explosion, or that whatever you want to call it that had happened exactly. I guess you could call it a lot of different things, but why did King say that the righteous and righteous were consumed? He really emphasized that. What was he saying there? What do you guys think? Because why didn't Larry and Ralph escape? Why couldn't they have escaped? But we don't know for sure that they didn't. We know that they were consumed in the fire, but anyways, what I was thinking this could mean is, again, I think maybe I look too much into things, so this could be just maybe not an issue for some people, but in the Old Testament, God's fire also came down to consume animal sacrifices. So maybe King considered Larry and Ralph to be like the sacrifices, so the rest of civilization could be free from evil. So then you're like, well, if you're Christian, you're like, well, Jesus was our sacrifice. Why would King make Larry and Ralph? They're just basic guys into the sacrifice. Well, that's why it's an allegory. So I think that the ultimate Christian allegory here would appear to be that the sacrifice of Jesus Christ was so that the rest of humanity could be saved, just like the sacrifice of Larry and Ralph was so that the rest of the world in the Free Zone could be saved. So that makes sense to me. And that's my explanation of the annihilation of Las Vegas. So after the ending, I was super surprised. Not super surprised, I would say, but I was more dissatisfied. What surprised me most was the way the book really stirred up a sense of hope and optimism, and like I said, I just felt joyful and peaceful, like wanderlust. I'm going on a great journey, and all these wonderful things are going to happen. We're going to go through all these bad things, but there's going to be a lot of wonderful things that happen along the way, and also once we get to our destination. So, my greatest satisfaction, to end, the whole book, not my favorite part, okay, because I have a different favorite part, but my greatest satisfaction, happy feeling, was, of course, I don't know how anybody else could say anything different, when Kojak ran back to Stu and brought him the wood for the fire. When you thought Stu was gonna die, then you're like, where's Kojak? And then you're like, Stu's gonna die. How is he gonna die? He's like one of, I just was like, oh, I'm gonna be so mad if he just dies out here. And then here comes Kojak, running along, bringing wood for the fire. And then I was like, yes, Kojak's back. And then I was like, good things, more good things, please. It was just the most pleasant surprise of this book. It was great. So the major theme of this book, in case I didn't note it or say it, I think the major theme overall is rebirth. Again, this is a Christian theme, but it doesn't have to be a Christian theme. We can all be reborn different ways. New phases of our life, new experiences can change us, and being born again can happen in all kinds of ways. Spiritually, mentally, even physically, in a sense maybe. But on a micro level, the several characters experienced the rebirth themselves. Trash spoke of redemption, atonement, and was reborn to the truth of his purpose. Larry experienced a rebirth throughout the story as he slowly became the person he wanted to be. The most obvious was Harold, who spoke directly of his rebirth before he died. He finally resolved that identity crisis that he had, knowing who he was, saying, call me Hawk. I don't know if he actually said it that way. But on a macro level, society is being reborn. The evil has been demolished, and humanity has a second chance. That is me experimenting with my writing skills. So I hope you enjoyed this. I sure did. I just been wanting to talk about this ending for so long, for like a month, and I am so happy to be able to share it with you. Yay. And don't forget to stick around for my next video that I'm going to do about all the characters of the Sam.